Hi, I'm Ross Bentley.
And hi, I'm Jeff Braun.
And this is
No
Dumb Questions. That, I mean, what I heard, that was about as close as we ever get, I think. But yeah, I think what actually comes through in the recording is not necessarily what we hear.
Right. It's once we actually hear it, every time I go back and listen to them, I go, oh, failed again.
You listen to these?
Bad. I do.
Really? Wow.
Because what people don't understand is there's no dumb questions, but I have to go back and listen to I'm worried that these are dumb answers. So I have to go back and go, oh man, I should have said this. That was dumb.
Yeah.
So the questions are great. The answers, at least mine, sometimes I'm a little nervous that they weren't as good as the questions.
So maybe I'm just stupidly more confident than you. I know they're dumb answers.
So no, you don't listen to them. You don't even question it. Okay.
No, okay. I'm just yeah.
All right. Well, I got a question for you then, and let's see. So this came in via the Speed Secret Facebook page, and I think I think we'll both be able to weigh in on this. But you're being a driver. The question was watching coverage from Le Mans. So that was obviously last year, and spotted the sneaky Speed Secrets logo on an LMP2 car. Of course. Yeah. Why would you be at Le Mans? I mean, that's okay.
And by the way, we did win the Pro-Am LMP2 class.
Right. Yep. So the Speed Secret stuff works. We knew that, but there's demonstration winning.
Le Mans. It's nice to be able to brag when they're actually doing the work. The drivers team are doing the work, and I'm kind of just along for the ride. So yeah.
Yep. So he says, my better half asked me how they manage driver fatigue. I responded with double and triple stints lasting long enough so that with 3 drivers, you might be out of the car for a couple of hours. Sports massage once you're out, nutritionist, providing food, etc. She responded saying she understood all of that, but how do you last a full 24-hour race with only a couple hours of sleep? And he said, I blue screen. I could point to vision of mechanics sleeping in their folding chairs. And I've read articles in Road and Track talking about how mechanics go to sleep to changing tires, I guess, when yellow flags dictate it, but couldn't speak to how drivers manage it. All right. So you've won Daytona, you won Le Mans. How did your driver deal with it? And at Le Mans, interestingly, for people that don't know, 24-hour race, they only allow 3 drivers, where Daytona, they allow 4, and you might get a little bit extra sleep. So how did they manage it?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say I think the days of the crew actually getting a break has gotten harder too, because with the series shrinking the fuel capacities, I mean, an LMP2 car goes at Daytona, 35, 38 minutes or something like that.
Exactly.
The crew, by the time they finish one pit stop, they barely have enough time to have a drink and sit down for 5 minutes, and they're getting ready for the next pit stop. So, man, the crews and the fuelers, imagine. So, Jeff, I mean, you just ran an LMP2 car at Daytona. How many pit stops? How many fueling stops do you guys do? Was it like 30?
I'd have to look back to it. We did. No, I was writing 40. We were in the 40s.
Yeah.
Because, we were 42, 43, because when yellows come out, you short pit.
Yeah.
And then the thing is, like you said, pit stop ends. The pit crew just doesn't set their air wrench down and go have a hamburger. They got to refuel the fuel rig. They got to put the vent fuel back in, refuel the fuel rig, get the tires out of the pits, get the next tires up to the wall, check the air guns because, to make sure that they didn't have a problem with them, check all their nitrogen bottles to make sure that they didn't run one down out of air for the next stop. uh, that's 15, 20 minutes. And so that car's coming back in another 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's really hard on those guys.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first year that I did Daytona 24, I think the car would go like almost an hour and a half on a tank of fuel. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
when you were waiting around to get back in the car, you'd look around and the crew guys were actually sleeping. They'd have a sleeping bag and,
Yep.
pull over themselves in a chair and they'd actually be sleeping. Those days are gone. So the crew guys, man, I think they have it worse. Now, drivers, I'm not going to say it's any harder. The consequences of a mistake, because there's the physical fatigue, but there's the mental fatigue for a driver. And a driver makes a mistake, and that can be super costly, right? In many different ways. Yes, the same kind of thing can happen if a crew guy doesn't get the wheel on properly, or a fuel nozzle doesn't go in right. I mean, yes, but the consequences of a driver making a mistake from mental fatigue is huge. We all know that sleep is critical, and some drivers, I'm going to say, typically what I've seen is drivers who are doing their first 24-hour race or their second one, maybe their third one, they kind of power through on adrenaline and they don't sleep much. And that's a mistake. And you watch like the best endurance drivers, they know how to rest in between stints. And every driver is a little different in terms of how they want to do that. But typically it's out of the car, debrief with the engineer, get their gear in a position where helmet's on a dryer or something like that. And then there's some routine, and the routine, again, the order going to change based on driver preference and even sort of where in the race they are. But it's going to include massage. It's going to include food. And there's usually all that food is kind of planned out for the race. It's not hey, let's go and get a greasy cheeseburger. It's really planned out as to what the driver is going to eat throughout the race. And it's get out of the sweaty driving gear into something dry, cool down, all of that kind of stuff, relax, stretch, all that kind of stuff. If there's enough time in between stints, grab a little bit of rest. Again, some drivers are better at turning that rest into sleep than other drivers. Most drivers nowadays, are using some kind of noise canceling earpieces to try to block out the sound. They're back in a motorhome in the infield. I'm thinking Daytona primarily there. Le Mans is a little bit different, just the location of where all that is, but it's the same kind of thing. They go back to a little tiny little hut or a motorhome.
Yep.
Yeah. But they've got that, and there's a place for the drivers to grab some rest. And again, the rest is going to be, the best drivers know how to turn their brains off and relax. I know a lot of drivers that use some form of meditation to help them relax, to get them into that. Some drivers will listen to music. Some will have other ways of helping themselves get into a state where they're relaxing not just their body, but their mind, so that when they get going back, they're more refreshed. Then they have to turn that around, because I'm going to say one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life is get into a nice cozy bed in a motorhome and you're just falling asleep, and somebody comes and wakes you up and says, get dressed, time to get back out in the pit lane. Because typically the drivers need to be in pit lane, depending on the team and everything, anywhere from one stint to a little bit more before they're ready. I mean, so if you're going to get in at 4:00 in the morning, you may have to be back in pit lane at 3 a.m., an hour beforehand, which can be
because I need them. As the engineer, I need them there in case we get a yellow in that last stint of the driver that's in. I'm probably going to change drivers, because that driver could have been on a double, and if I put him back in again, he's going to end up with like a 3.5 kind of thing. So, I needed the next driver there before I would put in the other, before I would So if I get a yellow, I can put him in right away and don't have to run the other driver too long. And also, there's rules in IMSA on how many you can only do 4 hours in any 6 hour period. So we could actually end up getting a penalty if I didn't have a driver ready to go in the car at a certain time. So they got to sit there and for an hour just in the pit box.
And I'll tell you, that's one of the most unpleasant things. First of all, you've kind of just started to drift off to sleep. You get woken up, told to get dressed. You get on the pit lane. Often at Daytona, in the middle of the night, it's cold, and you're sitting in a chair. And what other athlete in the world is put into that kind of situation where just before you got to go and perform at your best, you have to sit for an hour and get cold.
Right.
So, again, every driver has a different routine around that. Some, just are have different ways of doing it. At Le Mans, you'll often see a stationary bike in the back of the garage. And, driver gets on that just to kind of get their body warmed up. Often a massage therapist is there to help the driver kind of loosen up and get ready to get in the car. There's all sorts of different routines you can do kind of for vision exercises and things like that, just to kind of wake the driver up and get them ready to go. And again, every driver is a little bit different that way, but it's super critical that you have that planned out beforehand. And, little things like that I don't think most people think about is, most drivers, the best drivers, first of all, you have spares of everything. The number of times I've seen a driver, myself included one time, get back into the box getting ready to go, and you turn around and you're like, there's only one glove sitting there. And you're like, I walked from the transporter and I must have dropped one of my gloves. Well, good thing I got a spare over there, right? Or you dropped your earpieces or something like that. So most of the best drivers have, spare, all that kind of equipment. And then, Jeff, I mean, nowadays, most of the drivers will be there and they'll have a headset on and they're listening to you and the driver communicating about track conditions, how the car is handling, all those kinds of things, kind of getting a feel for what's the strategy, where are we in position wise here now. So when I get in the car, am I like push, am I save something in the equipment, that kind of a thing? Yeah, save fuel on a fuel thing. So the driver is all prepped for that kind of stuff. So, but the bottom line is you're tired at the end of a race. The Daytona, and I mean, Le Mans starts at 3:30 in the afternoon. Most of the time you get up at Saturday morning at 6:30, 7:30, 8 o'clock or something like that. So before the race has even started, you've been awake for a good 8 hours, and before the race even starts. The one, there's sort of a trade-off. Like at Daytona, you have 4 drivers. So you think, okay, that's a little bit easier because you get a little bit more time to rest. But sometimes the way it works is you might run one driver a lot early in a race. They get their time up, and now you've only got 3 drivers, but there isn't a lot of time in between. At Le Mans,
exactly,
you tend to have a little bit more time in between because the drivers tend to do a little bit longer stint. And Le Mans is not easy, but I'm going to say, I mean, Sebring 12-hour race physically for a driver, way harder than Le Mans or Daytona 24. It's a different kind of, but physically on the body, Sebring is way, way, way harder. 24 is harder, maybe mentally, just because of you just don't get a lot of rest. You can kind of power through Sebring. You can power through a 12-hour race that starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully you've only been up for 3 hours or something like that by the time the race starts.
Right. Well, I think, and I'll tell you, we as engineers. Now, I'm not gonna whine and complain or anything, but the crew maybe takes a little bit of a nap and shuts their eyes for a second and gets 5 minutes or 10 minutes in between stops. The drivers get their nutritionist and their massage guy and gets to sleep in the comfy motorhome. As engineers, we get up 4 or 5 hours before the race starts. So we sit in that pit box, and there is not really 30 seconds where we can take our mental focus off of the race. A yellow flag, are we getting the right fuel mileage, talking to the drivers, the tire guys talking to you. And that goes for that 24 hours. And hopefully, it's going to sound weird, but I know all of us, the one thing we scope out race morning or even before that is, and I'm probably weird, but I time it actually, how long it takes me to get from the pit stand to the closest bathroom and back to the pit stand, and how long I'm going to be gone. And because I maybe get to do that 3 or 4 times in the 24 hours, and you got to pick the right time, but that's the only time I'm not sitting on that pit stand. And it's just, you talk about the mental part of it. I'm not saying it's harder than the drivers, because I would hate to be asleep and have to suddenly wake up and do it. But that's that. And the problem for that is you're the most tired as the engineering team when you need to make the most critical decisions. Because at the end of the race is when it comes down. Do we save fuel? Do we take a splash? Do we not take a splash? Will we get a yellow? How are my drive times? Is that driver driven too long? You're doing math and looking at your computer screens when you're the most tired and it's the most critical.
Yeah.
It's what makes it fun.
Yeah. I coached at Le Mans a few years back, and my job was to watch all the monitors. And, at Le Mans, where you sit in the garage with a headset on, as the coach, I'm sitting beside the 4 engineers, and there are monitors with different TV cameras from all around the circuit. And then we have the marching ants, which is a map with all the little dots of the cars moving around. Then you have that predictive thing where there's a scale, and, your car is here. And if there's a faster car approaching, you can say it's 7 seconds back or whatever. And my job was to give that information to the drivers for 24 hours straight. Plus I'm looking at telemetry and kind of watching, brake traces and throttle, and kind of helping the driver as well. But I can tell you that I did that race on 1 bathroom break. The 24 hours of staring at monitors and same kind of thing. And I will say that, first of all, it was probably the worst headache I've ever had in my life after the end of the race. And then I got into, this is like, an hour or 2 after the race is over, and I get in the rental car with somebody else, and we're driving out of the track. And he told me afterwards, he says, I fell asleep in the middle of talking to him. I'm kind of like, blah, 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 and I fell. So the good news is that Sunday night you sleep really well.
Right. I've woken up after the race. I sleep whatever, 6-8 hours. I wake up and I kind of sit in bed, and I'm like, I reach up to my ears, and I'm like, my headset still feels on, because it's pressed against your head for so long that you still feel like your headset's on 8 hours later.
And you can still hear cars.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting, fun question. And here's what I'd recommend. If you're a driver, go do a 24-hour race if you haven't already done one.
Yes.
Because you need to suffer through it like everybody else. It's one of those, it's kind of like running a marathon. It's really rewarding, but it's painful. So.
Right. It's what they, the old type 3-2 fun or whatever. Right after the race, it's like, I'm never doing that again. That was horrible. Yeah. Oh, man. How stupid am I? By like June or July, you're like, yeah, well, remember Daytona when we did this and that, and it wasn't so bad, I guess. And by like October or November, you're like, oh, when's Daytona, man? I can't wait to get back.
Yep.
It's weird.
We're sick people. So
yes, very.
So Jeff, Alan sent in a question saying, I've raced the Radical SR3 for many years in the Radical Cup North America. I'm about 290 pounds currently. Most of my competitors are 100 to 150 pounds lighter. I'd be interested in your thoughts outside from losing weight regarding driving style and car setup for bigger, heavier drivers, if you think there is any. It's a topic that had never really been addressed. Regardless, I'm still competitive, scoring an occasional podium, but not grabbing pole like I used to when I was lighter. So, interesting question. And
It is.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that, it doesn't take a whole lot of weight to make a difference, right?
Well, I mean, the rule of thumb, which now that we have good simulation and stuff, we can change that real quickly. And I was doing work in 2018. We did a lot of sim work on the LMP2 car, and one of the things we did was my friend Andrea Quintarelli, who did all the simulation, would give me a sheet of sensitivities. Like if we increase the downforce by 1%, how does it affect the lap time? If we decrease the drag, if we increase the grip, and one of the things was if we increase or decrease the weight by a percentage, how does it affect lap time? And it turned out that the rule of thumb seems to be pretty accurate. So that rule of thumb, and rules of thumb are rules of thumb because they are, but it's about 1/10 of a second per 10 pounds. And that's, it's going to vary with some cars. More higher horsepower affects different. The tire you're on affect different. But you're not going to be too far off. So if you're 100 pounds heavier than your car or you or whatever, but your combined weight is 100 pounds heavier, that's a second a lap. Again, as at Le Mans, Daytona, it's why it's a rule of thumb. But it's not insignificant.
Right.
1/10 of a second per 10 pounds. And it's why race car engineers work so hard to make their car right at the minimum limit, because it affects so much. It doesn't just affect the acceleration, like you have to accelerate that extra weight. It affects the braking because you have to stop that weight. It affects the cornering because you have to turn that weight from going straight to going sideways now and around a radius of the corner. It affects all of those things. It also affects, if your race is of any length, it affects tire degradation because you're putting more load into the tire and it's wearing the tires out faster. So unfortunately, there's really no substitute for being lighter. But I mean, I've had cars. I ran a Nissan LMP, well, it was a DPI car in 2019, which we couldn't make minimum weight. We were 40 pounds above minimum weight. We just physically couldn't do it. Had all the ballast out of it. The car was homologated, so we couldn't put on titanium widgets and all that. It had a big Nissan engine in it, and we couldn't make weight. So you got to deal with it, right? So how do you deal with that? And it doesn't matter whether the weight, as in Elaine's case, is in the driver or in the car. There's some things that you can do to mitigate the negative effects of that weight. First of all, you can put it as low as possible. And so how do you do that if you're the driver? I mean, I've had drivers sit on the floor, like no padding, no carbon seat, sit on the floor. And don't kid yourself, an inch, if you can lower that weight 1 inch, that's significant. So, if you're a heavy driver, maybe you can get yourself lower somehow. Maybe you can lean back more and get your torso weight lower. Whatever you can do to get that weight lower is going to really help. If you have a heavy car, if your car's heavy, because this doesn't just apply to drivers. Elaine asked a good question, but it applies to any car that's too heavy. Lower, lower, lower. Get your battery as low as possible. Whatever you can do to get that weight lower is going to help. And then from a handling standpoint, if somebody said to me, Elaine said he's 100 to 150 pounds heavier than his competitors. Somebody said to me, okay, now you got to be 100 pounds heavier, your car does. My setup would probably be different. I would probably have to run stiffer springs, stiffer bars, because that weight, you have to control that weight somehow. And so, you might want to run a little bit stiffer springs, a little bit stiffer bars, a little bit, maybe your shock settings are a little bit different because you have to control the movement of that extra mass.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, those are the things I can think of. I know, I bet you got some driving things. What happens if you have a heavy car? What do you do as a driver?
Well, the first thing I think about is, it's kind of it's really the power to weight ratio, isn't it? Right? It's
Yep.
it's almost like, another way of thinking about it is, what would you do if you had 50 less horsepower? Well, the last thing in the world you'd want to do is slow it down. Uh, so
Right.
I think, momentum is your friend. And, so you're the way you approach a corner might be, rather than kind of the more, brake hard, get the car to turn and accelerate out of it. You'd be like, I would brake lighter, try to carry as much speed through the corner. And yes, the weight is going to have an effect on the cornering ability of the car, but I would work as much as I could at not slowing the car and just flowing as much min speed through the corner. And because it's going to be harder to slow it down, it's going to be harder to reaccelerate it. So I'm going to say
Right.
that's the biggest thing. And that's where, like you said, if you could lower your seating position by an inch, or probably half an inch, if you can use another inch of track on the radius of the corner, that's gonna help you. And
Yep.
you kind of got to go, okay, I've got to work with this, and you got to look at, well, what can I do to cancel out what disadvantage I have, and how can I gain an advantage over other people? There are a lot of drivers that don't use every last inch of the track. Well, if you did, that would be a good thing. There are drivers who overslow the car and they turn good competitive lap times, but they could be a little faster if they didn't overslow. Well, if you maximize your min speed, your minimum speed through the corners, and you use all the track and just maximize the radius, you can make up for a lot of it, which obviously you have, because you're on the podium at times, which is fantastic. Like on one hand, I kind of go, just keep doing what you're doing then.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
if you're having fun and you're getting on the podium, fantastic. If you can do a couple of things as you're suggesting, and one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about the setup, because I never really, that wasn't the first thing that sort of came into my mind, but I think about how often people put a setup on their car because that's the setup that everybody else runs. And
Right.
if everyone's running whatever 900-pound springs in the front, and you're putting 900-pound springs in the front, maybe you need 950s.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe you need different tire pressures. Maybe you need, you still tune the car to you and your car.
Yeah.
I'll go back to that example with the heavy DPI car we ran, that Nissan. We couldn't run. So it was based off of an LMP2 car, which was quite a bit lighter, but same tub, same suspension, same aerodynamics, same everything. Could not run an LMP2 setup on that car. It wouldn't work. It was, the car was just too heavy to do that. So look at some other things that you could maybe adjust. The driving thing is, I think, perfect, right? Don't ask your car to do things it's not good at. It's not good at accelerating. It's not good at stopping. So, instead of those V-shaped curves like you talk about on the data, you want these nice rounded ones. Want, and so maybe I don't know, you tell me, Ross, but maybe your line on the racetrack even changes, and people will be like, "What the heck is he doing?" Well, that suits his car better than a lighter one.
Yeah. I mean, with a momentum car, you tend to turn in a tiny bit earlier. And I know somebody's going to interpret that as, oh, I turn in early then. No, you turn in a little bit earlier and you make more of a constant radius through the corner than you would, the classic late turn in, square the corner off and come rocketing back out of the corner, because you're not going to rocket out of the corner. So,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, think about this, Jeff. I mean, in some cars, and I'm not sure. I mean, I've coached Radical SR3s, and you and I spent a day at Spring Mountain one time with a driver working on car setup stuff and everything. And I don't remember, but those cars do generate a little bit of aero from the bottom of the car, do they not?
Oh yeah.
In which case, sometimes a stiffer setup keeps that platform flatter to the ground and improves the aero, right?
Exactly. And the heavier the car is, the more it will move around on softer springs and 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 potentially get the suspension geometry in a position you don't want, or as you said, the flat bottom of the car, the aero in a position you don't want. So yeah, I would almost venture to say that if he's running the same setup as his buddies, it's probably not right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's probably not. I would look toward a little bit stiffer here and there and see if it helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, another good question.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to ask people to send us their dumb questions. These are all good questions.
No dumb questions. So they must filter that. They must say, "Oh, we can't send in dumb questions," so they only send in good ones.
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah.
I think that's how it works.
Yeah.
All right, I got one quick one. We're gonna really just hammer this one out really quick. It comes from Kevin Samp via Instagram, and he says, another fun question: what are your and Ross's favorite and least favorite turns at tracks? Either because trying to get a car setup is really hard or really fun. Also from the driver's side. So go. What's your favorite and maybe least favorite? I don't think you have least favorite corners. I've never known you to go, I hate that corner. That's you love those ones that you don't like.
I'm sorry, but I'm kind of struggling with this one going, I don't have a least favorite. All corners are good. Yeah. It's like when people say, what's your favorite racetrack? The next one I go to. It kind of actually, it surprises me when somebody says, I don't particularly like that track. What? It's a racetrack.
Right.
And it's what? That's a corner. They're all good.
Right. They're all good.
I mean, I would say that the corners that I enjoy the most are the corners that have more than one way to get through them. Like, there are certain corners that pretty much every driver drives them the same way. A good example of a corner that I love because there's more than one way to get through there. Turn 17 at Sebring. The bumps, the shape of that, there's at least 17 different lines through turn 17. And I love that. And I love track corners that, change with the conditions. Mid-Ohio, you can I got that corner just nailed. You run in the afternoon now and the conditions have changed and you're like, man, I suck in that corner. So I like corners that challenge me to drive in different ways. It's why I love driving in the rain because it's constantly changing. If there's a track or a corner that, you always drive it this one way, I'm not going to say it's a least favorite. It's just, I don't find it as challenging. I like corners that are super challenging and make me think more.
So for your answer then would be, what's your favorite corner? Anyone that's wet.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. I should have said yes. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Good one. So what about you from a car setup? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm similar to you. I like challenging tracks in general. I'll start out with tracks. There's been some talk over the years about repaving Sebring, and I'm like, oh no, that would ruin it. And they're like, oh, it's so bumpy and da 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 da. No, that's what makes it good. It's challenging. It's hard to get a setup at Sebring is really, 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 really hard, and that's what I like about it. So you said turn 17 at Sebring. As a driver, I like turn 1 at Sebring. I bet it could go hand in hand with you. The reason I like turn 1 is because it's hard from a mechanical standpoint because it's so bumpy, and it's hard from an aerodynamic standpoint because it's really fast, and you got to control the aero platform and the mechanical platform, and you can't see around it, and there's a big drop off, and the consequences are really bad. That's one of those, I was making my list here going, the ones I like are the ones that my drivers stop in the pits all the time and complain about. It's like, well, turn 1. They rarely complain about turn 7 at Sebring. It's like, whatever. Turn one I hear about a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's a fun one. And kind of along that theme goes turn one at Mossport, or I guess Canadian Tire Motorsports Park.
Yeah.
Whatever they call it now. Mossport. Turn one at Mossport. Whew. I mean, that's hard.
Well, when it comes to favorite turns, favorite corners,
yep,
any corner at Mossport.
Well, my second one is turn 8 at Mossport on my list.
I was going to say turn 2 at Mossport.
Turn 2. Oh, yeah. Turn 2. Maybe that's even better than turn 8. Just that track is phenomenal. I love that track.
Yeah.
And for all those reasons.
And I'm going to say that, there are some drivers who like slow corners more than fast corners. Other drivers like fast corners more than slow corners. But yeah, I think the common thread here is the more challenging the corner is, the more we like it. But
right. And it has to have a character. It has to have character. Laguna, they're going to repave it. I don't know. I'm not thrilled about that. I liked Laguna because it was low grip, no grip, slippy and slimy, and you couldn't it was hard to find a good setup because it's so slippery and so like turn 10 at Laguna. It's fast. Not the corkscrew. That you just plop down it. But turn 10, whoo. I mean, that could get your attention. And it's hard to make grip there. And so I like tracks with character. Watkins Glen has a character. Super high grip. Okay, that's its thing. Laguna has no grip. That's its thing too. Sebring has massive bumps. That's its thing. And you got to deal with that. Street circuits, Long Beach.
Oh yeah.
Hard track. Super bumpy. Actually bumpier than Sebring.
Yeah.
Based on our data stuff. So even street circuits, you can, and then we'll make it rain for you, and then they're all fun. They're even more fun.
Yeah. If it's the same line every single lap, that's not character. And I'm going to say one last comment I'll say is there's a lot of modern tracks that seem to have been designed with CAD systems, and all the corners have this perfect radius. Whereas, Oak Tree turn at VIR was shaped because that's the tightest radius that the bulldozer could turn to go around that corner. That's what dictated the radius of that corner.
Awesome.
Turn 2 at Mossport, there was just a hill there and they kind of went down this hill and curved around. And it's like corners like that have more character than tracks, some of the modern tracks that are like, they're too perfect in their design. Jeff, I think you and I were both sort of consulted on a track design years ago that never actually got built. But I remember, we talked about having a track designer come in, and then they were going to lay it all out. And then we talked about just before the surveyors and the person with the bulldozer went and did their work, we were going to get them drunk so that they just kind of weaved around a little bit, and that would add some character to it.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, you think about the tracks like old Cliff Tufty designed Road America on his tractor. And what a great track. I'll tell you, the track in my home state, not too far from me, Coda, beautiful. Everything about Coda, but there's not a good corner on that track. It's just too. I don't know many drivers that would put Coda in their top 10 of fun tracks to drive. Nobody really. It's not that. It's one of your CAD design tracks. It's just.
I think Lewis Hamilton does. He likes it.
Right.
That's
and I think
his Mercedes won all those races there. Yeah.
Right. And Mark Marquez, because he wins there all the time.
Okay.
On his MotoGP bike. But boy, it's just I agree. We need more. They need to have character. The good old school VIR, Road America, Mossport, Laguna. Love those places.
Sonoma.
I guess. Right. What about Pacific Raceway?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. By the way, they're doing a lot of improvements out there at Pacific Raceway, and it's going to be just as challenging and fun, but some improvements happening. So a lot of them actually. So
good. I need to come back. Yeah. Well,
okay.
That was good. Another
one in the books.
Another good episode.
Well,
lots of fun.
We'll leave it up to listeners to decide if it's a good one.
Right. I'll check and see to make sure that I didn't do any dumb answers. But other than that, that's where we are. So I hope everybody has fun. And until the next one, just keep enjoying racing and make sure it's fun.
Yeah. And actually, just thinking about that, if you do enjoy these, kind of post it somewhere and share it. And we'd like to put more people through misery of listening to us. How's that?
Right. Force them to listen to them. Yeah. That's a good idea. I always forget about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are you supposed to do? Share and subscribe, however you do that. I don't know.
Something like that. Yeah.
But
yeah. And
something like that. Yeah.
And send us more questions. Okay. That's it.
Right. We need questions. Sounds good. Have fun.
Have fun. Bye.